Let us pray. Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our heart be acceptable to you, our strength and our salvation. Amen. So, for those of you who don't follow all of our propaganda on social media, a little background as to why I was in New York, what it means, and why we flipped things around today, and our modern testimony is actually going a little bit later in the service. Back in 2006, I was very much like that man born blind in the gospel reading this morning. I was a child of the middle-class white suburbs of Washington State, and because I had never really been threatened, my survival had never really been in doubt. My desires were fairly ethereal in nature. I climbed the largest ivory tower I could to study theology, find meaning. After that, didn't really pan out. I didn't like it so much, I decided to climb all the way to the mountains of Tibet. I was kind of a cliche Gen X seeker, actually. But gazing up to the stars, I failed to realize the true lessons of both the Buddha and Jesus, which is that we don't find spiritual vision and insight by dwelling up in the clouds gazing at the sky. We get it by touching the earth, by going down deep in the mud and the clay and the spit. So, I first learned this lesson from a man named Jean Montreville. If you didn't read the sermon I put back out last week, or had my friends put back out, in 2006, I went from being a refugee fundraiser for Tibetan refugees to an immigration organizer for the beginning of something called the New Sanctuary Movement in New York City. 21 years earlier, Jean Montreville had committed the crime of selling drugs and being black. And following a conviction that would have gotten me a slap on the wrist and a book deal, Jean served his time and was released. But that wasn't enough for the United States government. The charge followed him around ever since that time, even though he agreed to every condition ever laid down by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. When I call ICE from now on, that's what I mean, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Through the constant check-ins and the fact that for a long period of time, he had to wear a tracking device on his ankle like he was an animal, it was impossible for Jean to ever forget in all these years that the deportation specter was always lurking at the door. American wife, American kids, American business. Decades pass and the specter never goes away. Jean becomes, with us and the movement and at Judson Memorial Church, a kind of immigrant rights activist, advocate. But back in 2010, this is 4 years after I first met him, they finally detained him. And they even had him on a plane for deportation at one point. And this was when the immigration rights movement really kicked into a different gear in my life and for many others. Along with the New Sanctuary team, we made Jean's name a household name throughout New York and around the country. We had thousands of people calling in every day into the New York ICE offices demanding his release. So much so around the country that they would call us and say, hey, look, we're not able to do business. You've shut down our phone businesses. This isn't serving anyone. They must have misunderstood our intent. So we doubled the amount of phone calls. And we lied out clergy on the street to get arrested like clockwork. We threw at them bad press. We tried to shame them publicly. Finally, they got so sick of the bad PR that one day, without any paperwork, without any acknowledgement or law or call or anything, they put Jean into a van in Pennsylvania, drove him to New York, and just pushed him out on the street. And he showed up at my apartment 15 minutes later. It was a miracle. This picture in your bulletin was taken 15 minutes after that moment. And you can still see the look of miracle on our faces. It was astonishing. After this, time moves on. We won a battle, but we hadn't won the war. Jean was he was free, out of danger, but he wasn't out of the woods. The long years of stress and ambiguity continued. It forced him eventually, he had to close his businesses, all the check-ins and all the stuff. He had to start over from scratch. Eventually, his wife, Janae, an American citizen who remains very supportive of Gene to this day, she can't bear the kids living under such stress and hardship and fear. She divorces Gene. Meanwhile, Hurricane Sandy destroys his upstart food cart business. Meanwhile, FEMA won't help him get back on his feet because he's not technically a citizen. Somewhere in there, I became one of the ministers of that church. And the organizing work of the new sanctuary movement fell to another friend of ours, Ravi Rugbir. Ravi is from Trinidad, and he'd been wrapped up in a wire fraud case 18 years earlier. He was part of this real estate deal, and although technically it was felony, it was a white-collar conviction that pooled up everybody in his company was convicted with the same crime, even though not all of them knew what the top brass knew, that what they were doing was illegal. So they all get a little bit of time. Ravi gets time, and then time in a detention jail as well. 7 years before that, he'd come very legally as a green card holder from Trinidad as a young man. But then from that point forward, like Gene, the threat of constant deportation follows him everywhere. Well, so Ravi becomes the sanctuary of the ED of the new sanctuary movement in New York. He becomes like an icon throughout the immigration movement. It's weird when your friends just become this mythological figure, but it happens every once in a while. So Gene and Ravi are now in this other stratosphere, and he works in the office right next to mine every day. We had the pleasure of working with each other day in, day out for years and years. We all became like family. When Ravi married a friend of ours, who was another immigration lawyer in our little circle, I got to be the officiant at their wedding. That's the picture you see on the cover of their bulletin. And even when I moved here to Portland, I remained on his defense committee for years. Scott's office did notary work for Ravi's pardon letters, and that went on for a while. So all of that background brings us up to what happened just 2 weeks ago, January 4th of this year. Following a brief visit home to eat lunch, Gene Montreville is picked up by ICE agents on the ground. 2 weeks before his regularly appointed check-in, which he'd never missed. And it didn't make sense to a lot of us why this would happen, this weird clandestine pickup. Why now? What changed? We all knew, those who were friends, that he'd been given a promise from the ICE officials that there would be no detention until all of his legal recourses had been exhausted. And there was still some stuff pending. So I was shocked. We were in Ohio. Alana and I tried to fly back that day. But the snows in New York made it impossible. Couldn't do it. Later we learned that that same day that Gene was picked up, that there were unmarked tinted windows but license plate Department of Homeland Security cars circling around Ravi's apartment and Judson Church, where Ravi had his office. Something was up. The jig was up. We didn't know why. We still had legal cases pending. So Ravi hid out at Judson for the next week, basically, knowing that something had really changed. And 1 week later, and again, we'd never had ICE officials lie to us before. They might be jerks. The policies might be atrocious and inhumane, but you'd never had direct deceit going on, and that's what this felt like. So 1 week later, a lot of story here, Ravi goes to his check-in anyway. He decides to go. He could have taken physical sanctuary, but for a lot of reasons, he thought it serves the movement better for him to show up. And so he does. He shows up with a big cadre of people, hundreds, I think, who wait outside Varick Street, or the 26 Federal Plaza, and he goes up with his wife, Amy, and they all wait to hear the news. This is a terrifying place, this office. This is the place where families get separated. Well, as Amy later told us, they told Ravi they were going to take him right that day and deport him, and he passes out. And after this, things get a little crazy. Ravi is quickly revived, but an ambulance is called to take he and Amy to a hospital. Outside, nonviolent protests start breaking out when the news gets carried down, and as anyone who has seen the video of it, and many of you have, can tell, the police violence response was disproportionate to what was going on. Actually, they end up arresting 18 people right there who were doing nothing. 2 of them were New York City Council members and a lot of the leadership of the new sanctuary movement, and no one could really articulate what they were being charged for. They were just being removed. Ravi and Amy in their ambulance do end up going to a hospital. But what happens is they get out. It's just unbelievable. They say to Amy, go get a wheelchair for Ravi. As soon as she gets out, she's surrounded by ICE officers, and the ambulance whisks away. And they tell her that, within 24 hours, someone will tell you where your husband is. But that call never comes. It's only because Amy's like a savvy operator that she figures out within the next day or two that Ravi was immediately taken down to a Miami detention center where he and Jean Montreville were in the same cell block together. This is why I flew out to New York. These people were my brothers and friends for a long time, and their families were too. And I thought, I know a lot of the players. I was that organizer for a while. Maybe I could lend a hand with some of the response while others were in jail. And let me just say, I'm so grateful to Sarah Vasquez, our moderator, and to Reverend Elizabeth Durant, who quickly supported me in what I felt like I needed to do. And not only that, they kind of said that, that goes for all of you. There's so many calls and messages saying, yeah, go, do it. And that support and the shared vision that this was a mission of our church, even though you don't know these people, and it's on the other side of the country, just so deeply meaningful to me. So I took a red eye, and I connected to Amy and Janae and Jean's kids, and I was able to talk to Jean and Ravi on the phone at some point in the detention center. I was able to pitch in with some of the strategy planning. We ran a silent vigil, just like Ravi used to run, and helped out with one of the largest press conferences Judson had ever seen. And through this, it became clear to me how different the scene was now, back from when I was an immigration organizer during the George W. Bush and Obama eras. And it was terrible back then. It was terrible because they were upping the amount of raids and deportations, which was just shocking. But it was not until this year and this administration we'd never experienced government officials flat out lying to us or pinpointing activist leaders in a show of force, essentially using illegal detention and deportation as political retribution for our disagreements about how to interpret America. That is exactly what is now happening under Donald Trump. On the same day Ravi was detained, ICE took another sanctuary leader in Colorado, same day, a leader in Seattle gets a court notice that she has to appear as well. This is the week after 7-Elevens throughout the country have been raided, and our president refers to Haiti, Jean Montreville's home country, as a shithole. It's strange how these days you can kind of get away with saying any hateful or racist thing you want in the name of religious or ideological freedom and get away with it. But if you are a church that actually takes the Bible seriously enough to protect strangers in our midst the way we're told to do, then unmarked cars with tinted windows start circling your building. Something that continued to happen while I was there long after Ravi was detained. Fun story. So on MLK Day, we had this big press conference and rally and everything. And at some point, I'm kind of running support. Someone says, hey, there are 2 guys at the door who clearly look like undercover feds. Can you go? And sure enough, 2 beefy guys in black long coats. And I approached them. Here they are, trying to look casual in a sea of lefties, trying to get in. And I go, hey, can I help you? Whatever, right? Can I help you with something? And they quickly stammer out the excuse that they are from the 7th Precinct and just observing what's going on with the crowd control in case things get out of hand. Nothing was out of hand. But I quickly reminded them that that's weird because we're actually in the 6th Precinct right here. And when I started to film them and ask for their business cards and their names, which is standard procedure for NYPD liaison community affairs officers, they both walked away without saying another word. So let me be as clear as I can. we have entered into a new phase as a country. It's not just rhetoric. It's not just weird tweets. It's not any of that nonsense distraction. This is about the very real-world consequences of extreme far-right policies playing out in our public sphere. This is about a kleptocracy which steals from the poor and gives to the rich, and the fascist oppression of a growing white nationalism, oftentimes in the name of Christianity, embodying the exact opposite of what Jesus would do. I feel like I'm on pretty firm ground with that Bible stuff these days. And so should you. That's what we do here. That's why these places are so important, for us to say what's true clearly. Now, if I sound outrageous to you, if I sound like I've got a level of emergency that you don't quite recognize, maybe it hasn't hit you yet, maybe, like me, you're somebody who's had enough good, fortunate privilege in your life not to see this urgency. I did not. It took friends, right? I didn't see it. Privilege is, after all, the degree of material and social buffering that each of us has from tragedy and calamity. The more buffering that we have, the more removed we are from what is happening on the ground and the dirt and the spit, the harder that is to see, the more blind we are. But in the direct targeting of sanctuary cities, in the illegal removal of social justice activists, there has now been an escalation on an ongoing hate war against immigrants, people of color, and anyone without enough money to buy their way into the good graces of this country. And as Christians, people who take this story seriously, if you take it seriously at all, then if we do not respond if they come for the immigrants, because we are not immigrants, if we don't do something when they kill black people with impunity on our streets because we ourselves are not black, or if we sit idly by when the poor are criminalized and left without the basic necessities for survival because maybe we're not poor and have what we need, then who will come for us? Amen. Right? Who will stand by us? And we might have the words and the songs of Jesus on our lips, but the gospel will have died in our hearts a long time ago. Instead, each of us now has to ask ourselves questions about these new things. Who are we called to do? What are we called to do? Who are we called to be in the face of a new American reality? Too big, too obvious, too overwhelming to take it seriously at times, until we lose somebody we love. I'm asking myself these questions right now. I know I'm going to pour myself into that Poor People's Campaign. I know that I'm going to have a deeper commitment to building the beloved community for everybody. And I don't know what else. I'm still figuring it out, and I'm sure so are you. Today you've heard the story about Jean and Ravi as best as I can give it. And after a song, it's a beautiful song, we're going to hear someone else. Our modern testimony will be one of the dreamers, someone closer to home, right here in our community. And you'll hear someone's story, and you can try to make sense with me why anyone would not do something about this, why a division over the dreamers is part of what's literally shutting down our federal government presently. Wendy, you'll hear from in a little bit, but there are so many other Wendys and Jeans and Ravis out there. These are just the people that I know. And maybe all of you already have someone in your life. If it's not a person of color or an immigrant, someone who's poor, someone who's not benefiting from this far-right switch we see. Today we're reminded that as Christians, grace only ever comes to us when we open up our hearts and build faithful community with the last, the least, and the lost. We've got to get down onto the ground. That's where vision begins. So I know I'm running a little long with all these stories, but in light of all this, I want to leave you with the words of my friend Gene Montreville himself. 33 years ago from today, he was a 20-year-old man, and he was already facing deportation. And at the time, he didn't have the right to an attorney then either. But the following was taken directly from his court transcript when Gene asked his judge for understanding and leniency. Your Honor, I have children, and I'm missing them growing up. All I want is a second chance, Your Honor. All I want is a second chance to prove myself, not only to you, but to me and to the world, that I know I'm a changed person. And I know I can be productive, Your Honor. Before I was detained, I worked for 26 hours each weekend to make money to support my family. And all I want is a chance, Your Honor. A chance to prove to you and to myself and to my family that all I ever wanted was to do right by my kids. I want to do right by this world and this country too, and I know I can make it. I can work hard, and all I'm asking you is to give me a chance, Your Honor. Just give me a chance to prove myself. Please give me a chance. Everything Gene did since that time proves that he was as good as his word. He did absolutely everything that the United States government asked of him, and nevertheless, 33 years later, he was deported back to Haiti on January 16th, separated from his children he worked so hard for, and leaving us all to ask ourselves, who are we called to be? What does this mean for us? Let's ask seriously. Amen.